Greetings. Today is a day of Baltic Birch work. We are cutting out sheets of Baltic Birch that we are going to use to cover the sides of our extruded aluminum plumbing system, the box that holds the water system and the hydronic system, a lot of stuff for the freshwater system. So to do this, we are using the track saw kit we have from Craig, and then this other thing we have from Craig. I'll look up, there's a link to it in the description below. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's a game-changing tool for me, not having a table saw and just being a new woodworker. It allows me to get a really straight cut. Additionally, I have this table set up with some insulation underneath it to protect it from the saw blade, and so my sheet's on there nice, flat, and flush, so I can be more successful with my cut. For PPE, I'm wearing a dust cover respirator and vacuuming up the dust after every cut, or at least trying to. So like anything, you need to measure twice, cut once. I'm trying to measure like 10 times, cut once. So we got our first cut lengthwise, and now we will do our width cut. And this contraption helps keep things pretty straight, but whatever it's guided on needs to be square. So we will measure from corner to corner on this in millimeters, and that will let us know how good of a job or bad of a job we did getting this square. So you want those to be pretty equal, and they were. That's a good feeling, because using extruded aluminum framing, well, if you do that right, it's going to be square no matter what, and you want the boards you put on it to be square too. You want everything plumb and square. That's good work. Okay, so now we're making the top section of one of the boxes. We're going to be doing the electrical box and the water box at the same time, basically ripping as many boards as we can that we know we need so that we can do this set of work in a batch. So we're going to cut them all out. We're going to sand and paint them with their clear coat, all in the same sequence. And then we're trying to get as many pieces out of our sheets of Baltic Birch plywood that we can. So there's some optimization there, which is what you see here. I find myself using the track saw less, and the saw guide, I guess I'll call it that, more. It's very helpful. We can see we're getting straight lines in the video, and we're confirming that with our measurements. All right, I just looked it up. It's the Craig Quick Cut Circular Saw Guide, and this is their track saw, so that's different than the other thing I was using. They're both good tools for the toolbox. You can't always use the saw guide, and that's where the track saw comes in handy, but the saw guide is the tool of choice if you have a square edge to guide you along. And it was like $45 on Amazon, so definitely not the most expensive thing in the world, and for what it does, it's worth its weight in plastic and a metal. Okay, so we're cutting our next sheet, and this looks like it's going to be the top to the water box, because it's a slightly different size than the electrical box. And we're just vacuuming our dust in between and continuing cutting this down to size. So that board's done, and we're on to our next one. This sheet has a lot of boards we're going to cut out of it. So starting with the bottom part of this panel, we're using our guide to help us. So we got the bottom part, and we will rotate around and do the side. Anytime we can use the guide, it's always more helpful. This is going to be the bottom hatch to the water box, which is going to allow us to store some stuff in there, like the shower head and maybe some other plumbing parts. And this is the back part of the water box. So that's where our water mixer will go. We'll dry fit that now. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's gonna be good enough. And then we'll have our water input to fill our tank, and our water output. And those are gonna go in those other 2 holes. So we're just measuring twice, drilling once. That bit got a little bit of hot heat on it there. And we're prying the birch out of it and test fitting our assemblies as we go. So this was the only board I needed. However, it takes so much time to process all this birch. It was like, let's do it all in batch. So I got it all out and did as many pieces as I knew I needed for my boxes in one big go. Cut them all out, sand them, and then go through 6 coats of painting and really 3 coats of sanding. So the first hole I drilled was a little too big for that water mixture fixture. So I wanted to use a step bit to get this next fixture fit better. And I did, and it worked out, and it was good to go. Okay. Now on some holes that we're going to use to put some rope through this board so it will have a bit of a ribbed handle on it, and then it will attach the frame with like a magnet latch. It's not that big, and I think that's going to work just fine for this application. Okay, on to another fresh sheet of Baltic Birch. And as I'm watching this, I'm realizing, okay, we are using our track saw, doing tons of measurements. And I'm also realizing that I am getting better at cutting straight and square. And a lot of that is because I'm using these tools and I'm using this table. I have a good work area. I'm not using sawhorses. Like, this table is flat. It's got the insulation under it. I got my PPE. I'm very focused on doing everything I can to make it so I have an environment where I can make a straight cut, because this birch is expensive, this project's expensive, and I want to do it to the best of my abilities. I want these cuts to be square. Okay, so we got the first 2, those are square, and now we're going to this one. It's looking good. This is thinner Baltic birch. It's going to form one of the sides for the either the electrical box or the water box. And then one of these is going to actually be leftover. So I'm just checking what I got here. Oh no, this whole sheet is for the electrical box. And we cut it into 2 pieces so that one piece could stay permanently attached to the electrical box, because it's going to have a fan module in it to pull air out of the electrical box. And that's what the hole we're drilling here. We're also going to drill another hole because we need a hole that allows us to access the outlet that's in the electrical box that we have our battery heaters plugged into, but we may unplug those at certain times and want to use those outlets for other things. There's also USB-C and USB-A outlets there. All right, so now that that board is cut and prepped, we can use our handy dandy guide to figure out what's next on our list. So we'll drink some coffee, we'll get our drywall square, and we will start measuring with our tape measure, making some marks and getting things where we want them. I can't overemphasize the importance of measuring repeatedly in an effort to get square cuts. So you measure repeatedly, and then you use tools that help you cut things square. All right, we got our PPE on. We are ready to start cutting again. And this is going to be the front for the water system box. It's also a relatively thin sheet of Baltic birch. We don't need 1/2 inch. It's less than 1/2 inch, maybe a little more than 1/4 inch, so somewhere in between. And the reason I didn't use 1/2 inch or heavier is because the thicker it is, the heavier it is. And this isn't going to be load bearing or anything. We just need something that covers the box. And I want it to look good and go well with the theme of the van, this, nice looking wood finished theme. So that's why we're using this type of wood, and that's why we're checking our boxes on this. So we measure diagonally to make sure we're square. And I'm going to reference my log to see how we did. On one diagonal, we were at 178.1 centimeters. On the other diagonal, we were at 177.8 centimeters. So less than 4 millimeters of difference in the rectangle on the diagonal. So that is square enough for this van builder. And putting it on our sheet, it looks good. It's looking like we want it to look, and we are ready for our next step. We're ready to do some more finish work on this. Starting with a 220 grit sandpaper, we sand front, back, sides, every surface of every board we just cut for our electrical and water box assemblies. Now that that's done, we do our first coat of finish. And ideally we would be rolling this on with a foam roller, but we don't have one. And I ordered one on Amazon, and later my wife picked one up from Home Depot after working out at the gym. So we got one. But if you don't have one, you can kind of do what I'm doing here, which is hold the roller and just kind of pull it across the surface like a rag, and that'll give you a good fine finish. With each coat, you want to make sure that no dust or debris gets on the clear coat you're putting on that, because then that's going to get effectively glued to the surface of your finished product, and it's not going to look clean. It's going to look like whatever got glued to the surface. That can be hard depending on your working environment, so just keep that in mind. Okay, on to our second board here. Now I'm using a little dehumidifying fan to run for an hour on the wet boards in between coats, and that just helps things get drier more evenly, hopefully more quickly. And I'm trying to do about 2 coats a day, maybe 3 if I can fit them in. Depending on your humidity level, the amount of coats you can do per day may vary. Now, with any painting project or construction project, there is times where you can fabricate, and there are times you need to do exactly what the manufacturer says. Well, when you're doing clear coat, do exactly what they say as best you can. This paint is expensive. It costs probably close to $120 to do all these boards. Okay, 4 quarts later, and we are ready for our sanding. But before we get to that, and that sanding is going to be at 320 grit, we're going to do a little more fabrication on our boards. On the water box specifically, we're going to cut holes with the router for the mounting brackets that are going to hold it to the extruded aluminum, or that are going to hold parts of the frame together actually for the bed. And then we have this hole for the air heating system for our Rexon hydronic heater, and the vents for that are going to go out of this hole. So we've cut that out, and then we used our rotary tool to smooth all our surfaces. So this board is a little more prepped. Ideally it would have been this prep before we started painting, but you live and learn, and that's what you do. Okay, now this is the 320 grit sanding we're doing on all our boards before we move on to our 5th coat, after which we will let that dry for 12 hours minimum, do another 320 grit sand, and then a 6th coat, and then we will be done. The reason the video is a little wavy is because I have extra LED lighting while I'm painting, because I'm examining these surfaces as best I can to make sure there's nothing on them. However, when I'm sanding or cleaning the dust off with a wet rag after sanding, I don't need that much light because I'm not worried about any contamination on the surface. These are just things that, well, going into building the Rosinante, or Rossi for short. I had no idea, because I'd never done any of this before, that it would take this long, or it would be this hard, or there would be this many steps. There's a lot of learning when undertaking something like this, a project of this magnitude. And these days, when I think back to them, these were long days, long build days. And I enjoyed aspects of them, but it was a bit of a slog, and it's a journey. So that's what we're seeing here, the journey of getting this Baltic birch looking beautiful. One coat of sealant at a time, one sanding at a time, one cleaning at a time. Those look very nice. This was the board that I needed. It spurred the project of prepping all the Baltic birch I needed in this next set of phases for both the water box and the electrical box. So it's the first one that's getting mounted, and this one I am mounting it with extruded aluminum fasteners, these 90-degree angled fasteners. So on one side we have T-nuts directly into the Series 10 extruded aluminum, and then on the other side we're just going to use some wood screws that I purchased off Amazon that are smaller than a 1/2 inch in length, which is the thickness of this sheet of Baltic birch. And then we're just using some clamps to clamp it into place. The difference between this one and the backside of the electrical box is it's completely covering the extrusion on the outside, which makes it look a little better in my opinion, but it may be a little less useful because you can't tap into that extruded aluminum on that backside and add, anything that's gonna tap into it. So pros and cons, doors and corners. And now that this piece is attached to the extruded aluminum framing, we can add in these plumbing fittings. So we have one for our water input on the right, we have our water mixer in the center, and we have the output on the left. Links to all this stuff on Amazon are in the link below, so just click on that and look for it if you're in the market for these things. On the back side of the water mixer, we have a hot line, a cold line, and a mixed line. So the mixed line is going to go into this output, male to female. Little thread sealer there from the Loctite variety. And we'll just tighten this up. Realize that if the fitting's in, it just kinks the hose. So we'll take that fitting out and then hand tighten it and then put that fitting back in, and just end up screwing it 2 times instead of 1 time. Switching gears here, we're going to go to the front side of the electrical box. Notice there's a vent hole there for a fan, cooling fan. And we're going to secure this the exact same way we secured the last one. Extruded aluminum fasteners drilled in with wood screws. And now we're ready to dry fit our handy dandy computer fan. This fan is going to pull air inside the box. We have another fan that will pull air outside of the box. These fans will be controlled on a relay that is activated when a temperature exceeds 84 degrees in the box, and then the fans will turn off when the temperature drops down below 74 degrees. That's the current setting. Now these fans are pretty loud when they're on full blast, so we'll be working that problem in a future video. In any case, that's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you around.